Hello. So this is what I've been working on. Not this TV. This TV took like 5 minutes. I just needed something to look at to make this slightly more interesting. What I've actually been working on are these uh, texture slots that I can cycle through. So this TV is kind of divided into 4 rows, and each row I can put a different texture on, as you can see. And that's controlled by these custom properties that I'm messing with in the bottom right corner over here. These are also keyable, so if I insert a keyframe here and then go to frame 10, I can insert another keyframe and it'll cycle through those two different textures. So I'm just going to be kind of explaining this setup very briefly. This isn't a tutorial. I'm just going to kind of explain the guts of this file, and I'll also upload the file for you to play with on your own. So here in the UV tab, if I select this whole cube, see, I call it a cube, it's basically a cube. You can even tell by the way it's unwrapped that this is pretty much just a cube. If I select these 4 and then move them along the x-axis, you can see that it just pans through the other options. So this is just using one single texture, and there's 4 different options for these screens to cycle through. The thing is that I don't want something that gradually pans through all of them. I want to move it exactly 25%. Because if I move it exactly 25%, it'll go to the alignment space, like over here in the UV space, I mean, it'll be aligned with the texture that I want to display. Or I guess the part of the texture that I want to display. So I've automated that with these properties over here that I showed you earlier. And these properties are actually controlling a node setup that I made in the shading tab. So if I go back into edit mode here, I have all these materials, right? TV row 1 through 4, TV2 buttons, blah, blah, blah. The only thing that matters here is row 1 through 4, because these materials are assigned to row 1 through 4 on the TV model. So I'll show you the setup with row 1 because I prepped that one to show. So here's the texture. The texture is just plugged into the base color over here. And I'm controlling the texture using this vector node. If you're not familiar with shader nodes or UV mapping or any of that, basically this node is altering the UV coordinates. So like it's that what that node is doing is it's actually doing exactly what I was doing over here. It's just moving this square in the UV space on the x-axis. That's all it's doing. And I can even demonstrate that over here if I unplug this. See this X location value. If I grab that and move it slightly, you can see it moving the X coordinate on the UV space for that specific face. So knowing that, what I want, like I said, is I want to control this X location value by exactly 25% intervals. And I have that set up already over here with these values here. Each one of these is a 25% interval. So this right here, this guy is 0. This is 25%. This is 50%. And this is 75%. And what this is doing is it's feeding these values into these mix nodes, and it's going through a bunch of greater than logic gates to basically decide which value to use. So if I go over here into my custom properties, these values here are actually controlling this shader setup. If we look over here, there's this purple thing over here. This is driven by screen row 1. So if I change this, you can see it's changing this value, and it's going, from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3. And it's feeding that value into this add node. The only reason it's doing that is to make it behave correctly, because I want it to always, like, if I have this value set to 1, it actually needs to be greater than 1. I could do the same thing by changing this threshold to 0.9, but it doesn't really matter which way you do it. So right now, the end result is 1 plus 0.1. So right now, the end result is 1.1. And then it's checking, is 1.1 greater than 1? And we all know that, yes, it's greater than 1. So what this node does is, if the value right here is greater than the value right here, it will return a 1. If the value if the second value is greater than the first value, it will return a 0. So right now, it's returning a 1, and it's sending it this way along this over here. And it's plugging that 1 into the factor node. Now what the mix node does is, if this factor node is set to 1, then it's basically just going to output this value here. If the factor node is set to 0, it's going to output this value here. It does more than that, but that's all it's doing in this setup here. So right now, we have this value is 1, which means factor is set to 1, which means we're outputting this value here, which is 25. So we're sending 25 into this value here, which is color 1. And it's basically the same exact setup. So right now, this is saying greater than 2, and we know that our value is 1.1. So we know that 1.1 is actually less than 2, which means this is sending the value 0 down this line, which means that this factor is set to 0, which means that we are choosing this color here, and we are sending it out this. And we already know that this color is, it says color, which can be confusing, but really this is just a number value, which means we're sending 25, or technically we're sending 0.25 or 25% into this color node here. And it does the same thing. This is 3. We already know our value. 1.1 is lower than 3, so we know that's sending a 0. So the factor here is 0, which means we're just sending the value 25% on to this this location node. And it's basically, that's it. It just works the same for every other row. So if I have it set to 0, that means we're sending 0, basically. We're not adding anything to the x coordinate. If I set it to 1, we are adding 25% to the x coordinate, which, as I explained earlier, 25% gets us exactly to this line over here. If I have it set to 2, we're adding 75%. And if I have it set to 3, we are, sorry, 2 is 50%. 3 is 75%. And yeah, that's basically it. It's really not that complicated. I guess I should also show the driver setup in case you don't know what drivers are or how to set them up. Whenever you set a driver for a value in Blender, it just turns that value purple, and you cannot control it. Like, I can move it around, but it's always going to set itself to whatever the driver is. So if I click edit driver here, oops, you can see that this driver is just an average value, and it's just using screen row 1, which is this value over here. All we really have to do these days is in Blender just click copy as, like, right click a value, right? Then click copy as new driver, and then just paste driver. And that's literally all you need to do. You can get really complicated and do some very advanced, like, expressions and scripting with drivers, but that's not necessary for this setup, so I didn't do it. Cool. Well, I hope that explains stuff. Feel free to reach out if you have questions, and like I said, I will be uploading the Blender file for people to look at.